Hello, Garland Nixon. It's a Monday morning here, and we're going to talk to Laith Marouf and get an update of everything that's going on in the Middle East. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, hanging out with Laith Marouf. And before we get going, let me show you something real quick. This is Israeli forces arrest al-Mayadeen Bureau Chief Nasser al-Laham. Israeli occupation forces have arrested the director of al-Mayadeen's office in occupied Palestine in a continued crackdown on the network and infringement on press freedom. Why do I say that? Because they know the truth, and that is the Israelis and the Americans, whatever, know that their biggest enemy is the truth. Their biggest enemy is documents and evidence getting out of the region, and people understanding what's going on, and that the more people know, the more that they will oppose what the U.S. is doing through its proxy, Israel. Why do I say that? Because you have an opportunity not just to be a here we go. Not just to be a casual observer. FreePalestine.video. This is Laith Marouf's channel, and it's FreePalestine.video. If you forget the whole time you're watching it, just look under his name, and there it is, FPTV. It's very, very important that we support FreePalestine.video. And as I said, the people who are doing these dastardly and evil deeds, they're very upset and unhappy about the work that Laith is doing, and Al Mayadeen's doing, and Press TV is doing, and even RT and all of these other people who are covering this from a more balanced angle, on a more balanced angle. So you go to freepalestine.video, you'll notice you got your latest episodes there, field reports, military operations. And the important thing that you can do is you can donate to Free Palestine TV. It is very important that you do that. Just go to the Donate to Free Palestine TV and click on one time, or of course, if you're able to, click on monthly. Even if you don't have much, a monthly revenue stream helps keep this going. So you're in the chat, you're doing the the right thing by learning, by improving your knowledge, and helping to spread this around. But it's also critical that if you can in any way afford it, that you donate to Free Palestine TV and help keep this important work going. And of course, equally important, make sure you share this on all your social media platforms, and go get the link for freepalestine.video. Share it on all your social media platforms, and put a little notice on the post that asks other people to donate. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate that. And now, Laith Marouf, let's get going. There's a lot going on in occupied Palestine. One of the things I've noticed lately, for all of this time, and we're told that Hamas was going to be defeated, wiped out, that they couldn't possibly resist in any way, that the empire was, like the board, it's a waste of time to even, it's futile to push back. I've been seeing a lot of videos and information comes out that says even though they don't have warplanes and howitzers and stuff like that, the occupied army seems to be taking a lot of losses and a lot of embarrassments.
Yeah, since the morning, there's been in the Israeli media talks about almost 30 Israeli soldiers dead overnight, and the helicopters are nonstop flying out of the battlefield into the hospitals in the colony. We saw, I think, at least 4 videos over the last 24 hours released by the resistance, and included in those videos are an ambush of a tank and an APC, and it's clear that the Palestinian resistance has much more opportunity now to hunt down the Zionists, now that they have pushed their occupation very deep into Gaza. They have long supply lines, they have predictable routes of movement, all of that. So now they're becoming easy target. They're not hiding behind the earth embankments at the edge of Gaza. They are inside. And the Palestinian resistance knows where they are, and it's acting accordingly. And add to it the fact that the Israeli military itself, their soldiers are fatigued. All the old guard on the ground, not just generals, but all the seasoned soldiers have either been killed, maimed, and or put out on retirement. And much of these soldiers, these that are involved right now, and the petty officers, are all young with no experience of fighting. Their machinery is deteriorating. There's thousands of videos of APCs and tanks being blown up by the resistance over the last 22 months. So that, clearly also shows how the Israelis are having to use older models of APCs and tanks in these battles, and that have less armaments on them and making them easier target for total destruction, and more deaths within those soldiers inside those armored vehicles. So the situation on the ground in Gaza, according to the Israeli media itself, over the last month was the highest number of Israeli soldiers dead in more than a year. And that's the numbers that they tell us, of course, which are a lie and probably 1/10 of the real number.
Well, something I've noticed, and there's a lot of information coming out now that the Israelis are hiding the amount of damage that they had during their confrontation with Iran. They were basically, they barely touched us. It was kind of like the old Monty Python thing. It was just a flesh wound, right? Where their arms are cut off. They got pummeled bad. What's interesting about Israel, occupied Palestine, about this government is they really got pummeled. And you could, I watched videos and I saw these missiles hitting. I saw streaks across the sky that were just, what were they, hypersonic missiles, where you knew there's no technology that's going to defend against something like that, right? So we saw really they were helpless against the Iranians. In fact, I would say this. What I saw was the Iranians' position was, we know that the Americans are going to come in and we better prepare for this. This is just a flea. This is just a mosquito on our back as far as destroying that the Iranians could have really destroyed them anytime they wanted. So they just pummeled the Israelis and prepared for what they thought at that time may be the real attack on Americans. But my point being, the government in Tel Aviv has got to hide their wounds, but they're a very wounded occupation force. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and those Iranian attacks, although they were not primarily targeting the ground forces of the Zionists, because they hit all the intelligence headquarters, the Mossad, the Shabak, the Aman, Unit 8200, as well as the major surveillance and radar installations and command control for Air Force and drones. That definitely affects the performance of the Zionists inside the extermination camp of Gaza. They don't have enough surveillance as they had before. They don't have enough electronic warfare. They don't have enough drones control and so forth. So the performance of the Israeli ground forces definitely directly was affected by Iran's actions. And coupled with that fatigue and the deterioration of equipment and the increase of the territory that they're having to maneuver in Gaza, increases their failure rate and them falling into these traps that the resistance is putting them. If they had all their information gathering capabilities and their surveillance capabilities as they were before Iran's attack, they would have a better success rate, these Zionists, inside Gaza. Now, we also, one thing that we need to remember about the damage to the Zionists is that we're starting to just slowly get information about that. So we saw, I think, the New York Times or the Washington Post or some Western newspaper a few days ago say that they have intelligence that the major air bases and major command bases in the north, in the south, in the heart of the Zionist colony were all hit with huge waves of hypersonic missiles. And remember in 1990, the Kuwait War, Saddam Hussein fired, I don't know, a few dozen missiles, Scud missiles over on the Zionist colony, and they claimed at the time there was 0 dead, 0 damage. And 20 years later, we found out that 90 somewhat Zionists were killed in Saddam Hussein's attacks with those old Scud missiles, and much destruction was a result of those attacks. So let's put that in the perspective of what Iran just did. And if a couple of dozen Scud missiles in 1990 led to 92 Israeli colonists dead, then how many were killed by Iran's attacks? And how much is the mass destruction of the command and control infrastructure of the Zionist military and or its industries? Like those tanks that we're seeing right now in Gaza, if the factories and the machine shops were hit by Iran, which most probably they were, then Israel is having a problem right now even machining replacement parts for those tanks, let alone producing new tanks. So the results of Iran's attack cannot be underestimated, I think.
I also think that, Netanyahu being here, that part of it is he's begging the U.S. to attack Iran. I believe that for this reason, for all of the things that people say, well, we discuss, Israel's going to attack Iran. I think Israel's so crippled. I think it's crippled. I think Israel's not in a position to, to attack Iran right now, because I think they're crippled and they're asking the U.S. to do it. And number two, that they know Iran would turn Israel to rubble in 12 days. So what are they going to do? Attack Iran again and stop after 12 days? They're not in a position. If they attack at 12 days, they had no choice but to stop. Another 12 days, there'd have been nothing left of it. That would have been it. Another 12, and Iran didn't even have to attack population areas. They strategically attacked all of the things that Israel needed for the war machine and took it apart. Another 12 days, there'd been no war machine left. So while, yes, they may desire attack, Israel can attack Iran. And the other part of it is if the U.S. attacks Iran, Iran has already still said they'll retaliate on Israel because they know the truth and they'll take Israel apart. So, yeah, your thoughts on Netanyahu coming to talk to Trump?
Yeah, look, one thing I would say that before talking about Netanyahu's visit to the U.S., there's the Zionists and the West worked on this myth of, Israel being a great nation. And it started from 1948. They tell you all the Arab states came together against the weak, new immigrant refugee Jews, and they defeated the Arabs. In what actually happened on the ground is that every Arabic country was still under occupation of French and English, every one of them, except Syria, who just came out from a revolutionary war against occupation that costed 2 million Syrians were killed by the French and the British before they left in 1942. Okay, and the Syrian people had World War I rifles and literally just a dozen old cannons from World War I, while the Israelis had full factories delivered from Yugoslavia, a socialist country, of tanks and machine guns. Full factories were delivered from Europe before the 1948 war and before the British left. Okay, so it was like cowboys and Indians, literally. Okay, and those who came across from Jordan and or Egypt, they were set up by their own elite to fail the Jordanian soldiers because the king his wife was being banged by the actual military governor of Jordan, the king of Jordan. His wife was. So it's not. There was never a war that actually Israel fought against a real enemy that was reaching a possibility of fighting it, that it could even withstand. So 1956, Egypt just escaped colonialism with Jamal Abdel Nasser. They do the tripart attack. France, the UK, and Israel, and take over the Suez Canal to not allow Egypt to have any financial income to rise as a nation after end of colonialism. 1973, the Americans did a non-stop air bridge. Basically, the Americans fought the war on behalf of Israel when Israel was collapsing in front of the Syrian and Egyptian armies that finally were catching up militarily. And up until now, since October 7th, Israel never fought a match to it, and still it was losing.
2006, Hezbollah, with a couple of thousand fighters, fought Israel, devastated Israel.
Yep. So Israel is made up of cowards, okay, that cannot survive, and this colony cannot survive without the direct involvement of all the West behind them with all their might and intelligence and military and finances and propaganda. If they're left on their own for one day against Hamas, Hamas will liberate Palestine. For one day, if they're left alone. So Iran doesn't really need to wipe the ground with Israel. It just has to manage to get the West to back up from backing the Zionist colony. And Netanyahu is there, probably right now, in the United States, and that brings us to your question, to try to convince probably Trump to trigger a new war, most probably against Lebanon. Okay. We saw overnight attacks on Yemen and Lebanon last night, and it was Ashura, which means the day of commemorating the martyrdom of Hussein, the grandson of Muhammad, and all the Shia were out in commemorations, and boom, boom, they're bombing people as they're out in their mosques and so forth. So it's clear to us where things are going. The Zionists themselves cannot stand that they have been humiliated by Iran in front of the whole world, and they want to show again to their own, deranged populace inside the colony and in the West, those Zionists in New York and so forth, that Israel can kill at will again. And so they want to probably make an example of Lebanon one more time. We'll see if they haven't succeeded in 70 years. I don't know if they're going to succeed now.
Yeah, it's obvious now that the whole thing was a fraud. I mean, Israel, I heard it said about the Europeans. They said if you play a Doberman, if a Chihuahua plays a Doberman on TV long enough, he'll start thinking he's a Doberman, but he's not. He's just a Chihuahua. And that's Israel. Israel must have started really believing, oh, yes, we're tough. Sure, Iran's 78 times bigger, and, they've got a 3,000-year history, but we'll take them right out. And they finally got enough nerve to take a swipe at Iran. And Iran pulled all theirs. Iran could have obliterated them. Iran pulled their punches and just crushed them like they were nothing. That's pretty obvious. At any rate, let's go to Yemen. Even Yemen, the Israelis will go in and bomb ports or whatever there in Yemen, and then Yemen shuts down their airports. They don't tell me. I was reading where Yemen had hit one of their settler areas. What do they call the areas where they, occupy a certain area that they're not supposed to be in and build there? And I'm sure there were losses that they're hiding. But at any rate, Yemen keeps punching them, and they bomb or they do something. But it seems to me, to be quite frank, that Israel's at war with Yemen, as with everybody else.
Yeah, last night they did those attacks on South Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, and at the same time they attacked the coastal cities and port cities in around Hodeidah on the Red Sea in Yemen. And there was supposedly 16 Israeli jets And we had for the first time a statement from the Yemeni armed forces saying that their air force is engaging. So this is something that we haven't heard before. And we also saw the introduction of new air defense systems that the Yemenis built. And the Israeli media admitted that two of the jets almost were hit by the air defenses of Yemen and they had to retreat. So part of the attack was a failure. The Israelis targeted the three ports again that they targeted last time, and they targeted the electricity plant near Al Hudaydah. So, and within minutes of that, there was hypersonic missiles fired from Yemen, two hypersonic missiles last night, and videos came out showing that those hypersonic missiles reached their target. And in the videos from the one that we saw from Tel Aviv, it's clear that there was not one air defense battery that fired at the Yemeni hypersonic missile. So this leaves us with a huge question. Is the air defense systems of the Zionist colony depleted completely, that they can't afford even firing any of these missiles? Because if you remember the last day of Iran's attacks on the Zionist colony, in those videos, we also saw there was no air defense systems firing back at those missiles. And at the time, Iran used those new hypersonic missiles that break up into multiple heads. And, the question was, are these missiles designed in a way that radars can't reach them, or did they get into outer space and then descend with the multi-heads missiles in such a speed that there was no response time left for the Israeli air defense systems? So no matter whichever way we look at it, Yemen's actions yesterday and the missiles reaching their goal with no interception being fired, it means Yemen now has surpassed a level of sophistication with their technologies that they can hit any target they want to in the Zionist colony. And that's a great, great thing, because the more of the enemies of the Zionists that can do this, the better.
Also, I've been reading a lot more about what the Iranians did, and they used some dummy missiles that didn't even have a warhead that was slow flying. And they just flew into, and so the talk about, there was a discussion about, oh, well, the US was used, I mean, the Israelis were using, $2 million missiles, 2, 3, and 4 of them to fire at $1 million Iranian missile. Well, some of those Iranian missiles weren't even $1 million. They were just fakes. So they were used firing $2 million missiles that basically, like a cardboard box effectively. So they used up their missiles with fake missiles. Then some of the fake missiles would have a warhead. So if they let that go, it would still. So they just basically overwhelmed their system. That strategically, they just outclassed Israel, overwhelmed their system. And I believe this business about not sending stuff to Ukraine now, there's two things. One group of thought is, well, we've just given up on Ukraine. I think that it's not an accident that as soon as Israel got pummeled and their air defensive system got blown to smithereens and outfoxed, that suddenly the U.S. empire said, oh, Ukraine, we got nothing else. We can't. I think that they were basically exhausted by the Iranians. You know what? It's like there's two fronts. The Russians are over here and they're hitting and they're exhausting. The Iranians come in, and now, because it's all the U.S., this is not, Israel, Ukraine, whatever proxies. And Iran came in, and Iran exhausted the U.S. empire on another front. And though they may not come out and say it, and I don't even know if it's the intent or not, but these various entities are exhausting the U.S. over here, exhausting the U.S. over there, and it's how we say, a multipolar effort.
Yeah, that's the only way to actually go to war with a nuclear powered superpower, okay, nuclear weapon superpower like the United States, without leading us to a full Holocaust, right? for humanity, nuclear holocaust. And in a way, it's very similar to how the U.S. took down the Soviet Union. And we hope at the end that it will be as peaceful. The dissolvement of the American empire would be as peaceful as the dissolvement of the Soviet Union. And that those nuclear weapons will never be used. There was a study that just came out 2 days ago about the THAAD systems that the United States used to defend the Zionist colony in these 12 days. And what we know now is that the US withdrew its THAAD batteries from South Korea during the war and delivered them inside Israel and inside Saudi Arabia to defend against the waves of missiles and drones. And that left basically, look, it's not only that they're abandoning Ukraine, they just literally abandoned South Korea. Brother Kim could have just crossed the border and taken over South Korea. This is how desperate the U.S. was. There was no more defense against North Korea's nuclear possibility of attack on South Korea or American bases, because of the U.S. wanted to defend the Zionist colony. Beyond that, we know that the defense of the Zionist colony, the United States used over 70% of all its THAAD missiles anywhere in the globe. So I think it's like they have 200 something of them, and they used over 200 of these 100 and something of those missiles. So around 70% of the US cache of THAAD missiles were depleted, used in those 12 days. And the cost was, just for the missiles, was $2 billion. That's for the THAAD missiles, $2 billion. Forget the cost for operating them. Forget the cost for mechanical and all of that for those machines. Okay. Forget also the costs of all the arrow systems and the David Sling and the everything that the Israelis use. So most probably the air defense systems cost for the Israelis was over $4 or $5 billion in those 12 days. That's only in air defense missiles. That's a huge number. Add to it all the damage. Add to it, this is going to be in the tens of billions economic waste for the Zionist colony. And if the United States is unable to refill its cache of THAAD missiles, which I think they produce like 20 or 30 of them a year, how can we expect the Israelis to have a better capacity in producing arrow or David Sling? They probably don't. Therefore, they're in a really tight spot now if this war is instigated again. And this is why I think they want to concentrate on Lebanon, in hopes that Lebanon doesn't have, or Hezbollah doesn't have these, which it doesn't need these or long-range missiles, that they will be depending only on the Iron Dome short-range missile defense that they have much more of. But who knows what Hezbollah has and how it's going to be using it. I think the next war, if the Israelis make this mistake of re-triggering the war in Lebanon, is going to be very destructive in a different way than Iran. And it will expose a different weakness we will see for the American power projection in the whole region.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in the same way they're hiding the amount of damage and where the damage was done, they're doing it all over. They're hiding the amount of hardware that they used. They're hiding the amount of people that they lost, etc. That they were devastated. And I think that the U.S. empire is in a position that it's never been in before in the region, simply because they just suffered a defeat. Well, let's say this: 2 defeats. They said we're going to take Yemen out, and within 30 days they had to run for their lives and make excuses about planes falling overboard, which, from what I see now, some of them had to be shot down, but they're saying they fell. So they were defeated and run out of the Red Sea by Yemen. supposedly. So, well, we'll just focus on Iran. They focused on Iran. They were defeated and humiliated by Iran. I'll add this. If I'm South Korea, what do I care about the THAAD system? It don't work. Even if I'm South Korea, I'm like, hey, send the THAAD system back. What do you think North Korea or China would do? They'd send a bunch of dud missiles over. They'd make it shoot at blanks. And then as soon as it ran out, they just, so now everybody knows they don't have that many missiles. So, they'll send the THAAD system back. In 5 minutes, it'll be out of ammo. We'll blow it to smithereens and you'll be naked. What everyone knows is, only thing I need is more missiles than that thing has. And that ain't hard. And it's defeated. So if you're a ally or vassal out there like South Korea, you got to be looking over your shoulder saying, perhaps we need to maybe make friends or do something to look out for ourselves. This is the part that's being, and even Taiwan. Here's the truth. The U.S. can't protect you. Even if it wanted to, which it doesn't, it's being revealed that it doesn't have overwhelming military force. It doesn't even have whelming, much less overwhelming military force anymore.
Yes. And, the U.S. Aircraft carriers are also now a huge burden after that battle with Yemen. And we saw how the UK was trying to assert itself around Taiwan just last week. They sent their own aircraft carrier, tried to cross from the Strait of Malacca, and then 2 Chinese aircraft carriers appeared out of nowhere. And there's this super stealthy jamming headquarter that the Chinese created, a ship that is like, the American and Western ships can't even see it coming. Remember last year there was that exercise that all of the NATO navies did around the Philippines, so on the other side of the Philippines, and out of the blue, they realized only by somebody spotting it with their own eye that there's this Chinese super surveillance ship. And they had to cut down the whole exercise because there was like 12 nautical miles from them, and they couldn't see it on any systems. And this same kind of ship immediately jammed the British aircraft carrier this week, which makes the ship not know where it's going. Probably its own missiles will hit it if it fired anything. So now they retreated, the British, and they're going to come with a bigger battle group with the French and the Italians and so on, that still believe somehow that they are colonial power, or that they can do something, together with their British friends. So that this whole naval power, projection by air or by the Navy, is now coming to an end. Projection of power through air or sea, and we're back to the original. How armies worked. How many men do you have on the ground? Can you fight it? Because smaller nations that can't afford building aircraft carriers and multiple jets and so on now can have these hypersonic missiles and drones and can project defense to any territory that could attack them. So now it's back down to the original formula of ground forces. What can you do with your ground forces? And America and Israel haven't fought one ground force battle that they won since World War II, obviously, the Americans.
Well, I believe this. There's like 2 kinds of powers. There's like Rome was a ground power. You know what I mean? It was a ground war power. The U.S., felt as though the U.S. empire, from the British, the NATO, that's the North Atlantic. That was their access to the sea, implying we are a naval power. The old Spanish armadas, the British ruled the waves, and the U.S. took from British imperialism. We're going to be a naval power. We can block off your access to shipping routes. That was all that British naval power stuff. We can dominate the seas, right? Well, what missiles mean is you can't any longer dominate the seas. One thing we're seeing by Russia, the U.S. couldn't even dream. All of NATO together couldn't dream of being the ground naval power. The ground military power of Russia. They'd be crushed in hours at this point. They can't even put people together that can fight to have the military might on the ground, much less the warrior spirit to defend their homeland. Well, first of all, the Russians are defending their homeland, and you're going to attack them. You're always going to lose that. But so the U.S. doesn't have, much less, what is it, 2-3 million people in the Chinese military with 25 million reserves. That's not an option. But we're seeing with Iran and Yemen that because of missile technology, they're able to dominate both ground and naval in their region. They don't need to dominate the whole world, but they can dominate in their region with air power because of missiles. The technology has changed the game. If Iran didn't have the kind of missiles, and foolishly, if the Israelis didn't give them the opportunity to demonstrate their domination, they'd still have this fake idea that out there that they could. Everybody's got to be looking and realizing that the U.S. the empire doesn't have ground military domination. It doesn't have naval military domination. It has no, and we see BRICS, the economic domination is melting away. There is no domination. The empire can't dominate anymore in any spheres.
Yes, and it's unbelievable how disassociated they are from reality sometimes when you hear the American, representatives speak. That the American envoy of Trump just arrived today in Beirut, and he had a press conference, and he was yapping about disarming Hezbollah, and that the whole region is changing, and Lebanon has a choice to join the new Middle East and or be left behind, and basically saying, look at Syria. This is amazing that he would say this. Look at Syria, how all the world is opening up to it now, that it's not, and you're talking about Wahhabi death squads that are in charge of Damascus. This is the model they want. And this all comes at the same time as those threats are arriving with all that propaganda that we saw over the last few weeks, few days, about a deal between al-Julani in Damascus and the Zionists, and that they're meeting, and that the deal will include Syria accepting occupation of the Golan in return for Israel allowing the Jolani to occupy Tripoli, the second largest city in Lebanon on the north coast, and to take the Biqa' Valley, which is the food basket of Lebanon. So you hear all of these things and you're like, how can these people come up with these words? How can they imagine these things as if they are, in charge and in control of the situation, as if they didn't just get a whipping in Iran and in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Yemen? So, but this is a possible reality of HTS having a combined attack with the Israelis on Lebanon. We saw examples of that in January after the fall of the government in Damascus, where HTS attempted to invade the north of Lebanon, and the Lebanese army just disappeared, and the local tribes and clans had to fight back the HTS and defeated the HTS, and then the Israelis came to give them the HTS air cover to hit the high points that the resistance was controlling, that allowed them to destroy the columns of HTS. So we had a kind of a preview of a possible combined Wahhabi Zionist attack on Lebanon. And even in that moment of total chaos, with the Syrian government not there, and with the whole world basically in the West shaking hands with HTS, they could have walked into Beirut and slaughtered people in front of all the cameras, all the Christians, and Trump would have still shook a hand of al-Julani. And in that moment of total assassination of the leadership of Hezbollah and the pager attack and so forth, still Hezbollah was able to defeat the HTS. So I think, all this talk about supposed invasion is a crazy talk. They may do it. I'm not saying they're not going to do it, the Israelis and the HTS together, but they will lose badly. And Hezbollah has been waiting, I think, for an actual attack. It's the same way that the Iranian government waited for the attack in order to get the whole people behind them. Until now, Hezbollah has not been intervening in anything in Syria. But the minute the HTS attacks Syria, I think this will give Hezbollah not only a chance to defeat HTS, but maybe even liberate Syrian land. And we may, this stupid arrogance of the Zionists may lead to the fall of the HTS government and the liberation of Damascus less than a year after they took it over.
You know, if I could, something we don't talk about, but I would like to get your just a comment from you on. Apparently, there was a conversation between Presidents Putin and Trump, and Trump came away seemingly mad. Apparently, President Putin stood his ground and said, "Look, this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to stop until it's done." And Trump walked away and says, "He doesn't want to stop." Well, yeah, well, and I'm thinking, you attacked him. The U.S. attacked him, and now they're saying, well, he's unfair. He doesn't just want to throw in the towel when he's winning. Your thoughts on it, what's interesting, until the Iranian conflict, I think in a way, I knew that the Ukraine conflict had a dramatic impact on U.S. imperialism and NATO worldwide. Until the Iranian conflict, I didn't see as much a connection, but now seeing, oh my gosh, they're running out over here, so they got to take it from here to move there and blah, blah, blah. I tend to believe, maybe I'm wrong, there's more coordination going on than many of us know, that there's a lot of faking going on behind the scene. But at any rate, your thoughts on the Ukraine conflict and the state of that and the whole connections thing.
Yeah, like the Ukraine conflict was engineered by the West, not only to weaken Russia, but to force Russia to withdraw from the war in Syria. Because if there's a huge war as is on its border, it is more interested to defend itself. And as we saw, in the end, the US got what it wanted in Syria through the activation of this war in Ukraine. But now that the US doesn't need the war in Ukraine anymore, and the West is embroiled in an axis of resistance war that is dragging it, to the limits of its supply chain of weapons, Russia doesn't have an interest in stopping the war. Why should they? If I was in charge, I would say, okay, let me take the whole of Ukraine, maybe. Okay, and also, Russia has no interest in having a fast win either. Okay, Russia wants this to be bled as far as possible now, given that it's clear that the West is collapsing, and maybe in a way, also why we see the axis of resistance as a whole and Iran not finishing off, for instance, the Zionist colony. Then the longer these wars are dragged, the more discontent there is in the societies in the West, and this association between the peoples and the leadership, the more the Western media and propaganda machine collapses because of the lies, the amount of lies, and the more possibility that there will be peace without reaching the threshold of a world war. Okay, can we defeat the Western imperial project without actually having a world war? That's the interest of anyone who's a humanist. And that means that you will count your sacrifices against that possibility of a full world war with nuclear weapons. Okay, so I might as well, this is what the Iranian leadership is thinking. This is what the Russian, the Chinese, or so forth. They'd rather lose some people now and drag this longer in the end, where we don't reach a world war and the West retreats and the Zionist colony ends and we have a multipolarity where the West accepts to be a pole in it, than breaking that West and breaking all of humanity at the same time.
I think you're right. I agree with you 100%. I think they're like, let's bleed them. Here's what I look at. I did a video. I need to bring it up years ago, and about a year and a half ago, maybe. And I said, will Putin and Xi save the world? Well, I could have added Iran. I could have added all of the resistance in, but at the time, that's what I did. And basically what I said was, they're managing the downfall of an empire rather than just hit it, boom, it drops, you get instability, God only knows what'll happen. Like you said, they're bleeding it. And so it seems to me that to me, when I say the resistance, I don't mean Iran, or I mean there's a worldwide resistance, which includes things like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This discussion they were having at BRICS the other day of how to, coming up with something other than they use, I think, their investment bank for the same thing as SWIFT, right? And even then, they're not going to do it so fast as to shock the U.S.'s economy, so the U.S. economy drops and they get desperate. They're managing the decline. These are very, very wise people, and I think part of it is China's been around for 5,000 years. Russia's been around for 1,000 years. Iran's been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. They've seen empires rise. They've seen them fall. They understand. And I think they are managing the decline of an empire themselves because of the nukes. And they're bleeding it slow, and they're not doing anything to shock it too much. And they're just letting the air out of it, slowly and intentionally, so as not to shock the system too much. It seems to me that it is, I would call, a managed decline.
Yeah, and look, it's nobody's interest to have mass number of people that are armed also in the US to go into anarchy.
Right.
This will actually appeal to the most base needs and feelings, and which are animalistic for humans usually. So it's clear what the Chinese are trying to do. Even with the gradual dumping of the American dollar, they could have done it a long time ago, or I think their purposeful managed, inclusion of new members into the BRICS or other associations like that, to limit the competition even within the BRICS, or the unpredictability of decisions of the BRICS. The more members you are, the more voices there is, and there could be people that want a radical position and so forth. So they're managing it. It's not a democratic thing, but that's the only way right now. From the experiment of what we saw happen to the Zionist colony over the last 22 months, it's clear that the Zionist colony is not going to exist for much longer. And that will be the only thing that's going to accelerate. And I think this is partially why that's going to accelerate in a possible non-managed way, the collapse of American imperialism. Because the minute the Zionist colony ceases to exist, the Jordanian regime is going to fall immediately. No questions asked. What's going to happen to Syria and Lebanon is a big question mark immediately, right? And that's going to drag in Iraq into it. And so and once that happens, those royal families in the Gulf that have been protected under mercenary gunpowder for the last 100 years, there's nobody to protect them, to scare the Arab unificationist sentiment within the Arabic people. And what's going to happen if the US loses control, if the West loses control of all of these oil fields? It's a third of the oil and gas in the world. So things are, once we get to that point, and I think this is why the whole axis of resistance, the Russians and the Chinese are trying to manage this as far as possible to make sure that the ramifications of the liberation of Palestine would not lead to an immediate collapse of American imperialism in ways that are unpredictable.
I think one more thing on this, and I think it's important because this is an important discussion. I think that's why the Iranians pulled their punches, because everybody looked at it and said, boy, you know, they can't defend against a single hypersonic missile. If Iran had just said, we're going to use all hypersonic missiles and we're just going to wipe out everything that we need, we're going to pick our targets, 100 targets, and put 50 hypersonic missiles on every target, and it would all be rubble and that would be it. But it would be too much a shock of a system. I think what they did was they pulled their punches, and as soon as the Israelis cried uncle and asked for mercy, they said, okay, we'll end it, no problem. You stop shooting, we'll stop shooting. Because as I've discussed with Larry Johnson, there's two ways to get rid of Israel, the Samson option or the Samsonite option, and they chose the Samsonite option. You've got a bunch of people there who are accustomed to a cushy life. And if I make their life miserable, they'll go to hell back to Brooklyn. So instead of attacking Iran and having it collapse from a military defeat and be smashed to pieces, and then what are we going to use? Nukes? Are we going to do this and put them in a position? You know, never yell around a crazy person. You know, you don't want to do too much. You don't want to, never get a crazy person too excited. Instead, they just collapsed their ability to be a European nation with all the streets, cafes, and all the luxuries. And when they did that, all these people from Brooklyn and Paris and all just went the hell home. So they depopulated it. They let the air out of this thing. Instead of smashing it to pieces, it's clear they could have. It's clear that Iran could have devastated Iran Iran could have devastated Israel with that days. But I think the plan was, let's make their lives miserable and they'll just leave. And we're fine. We don't need to we just want them to get the hell out of here. And apparently that is the method that will be used to empty the Zionist colony. Rather than do it through killing people, just make them uncomfortable and they'll go home on their own.
Yes, and already Cyprus is shaking because of the huge amounts of colonists that arrived. I mean, it's a country of less than 2 million citizens, and there's over 250,000 Israelis already there. So demographic change is happening, and the Cypriots are waking up to understand what it means to be occupied by 2 British bases, and that they've never received any independence, really, and they could lose even their identity at any moment. The Israelis could say this is part of the promised land. And so it's this is above and beyond the millions that went already to New York, Toronto, Montreal, and London, and over the last 22 months. So the Zionist colony most probably lost around 30-somewhat% of its population over the last 22 months. If this continues on this path, pretty soon there will be not enough people inside the colony to do anything, and that's the end of it. This is why they're depending more and more right now on mercenaries. By the way, we see a huge intake of mercenaries, including that Gaza humanitarian fund stuff. That's all shows you that the Israelis are running out of men, basically.
Something else, and I do want to remind everybody that how important it is to check out freepalestine.video. Oops, I got refilled. Wait a minute. But there we go. Let me show everybody. And we're not leaving. I still have, this is going to take us into our next segment. freepalestine.video. Don't forget that's Laith's website, and go there, make sure you donate, and if you can afford it, make sure you become a monthly subscriber. Look, all the field reports, military operation. Also click on their social media links so you can follow. They put out all kinds of video information. It's a great website. Now, the reason I said that, because you and I, we're alternative media, whatever you call it. I think we're not so alternative anymore. We're getting to be the media that people go to. But here's the issue. Tucker Carlson, I have some disagreements with Tucker Carlson. I have disagreements with everybody, but I got to say the guy does some good. I got to give him credit. Now, I heard him talking and he said, And this was just straight. He said, the U.S. wants to go to war with a country. I think the American people have a right to hear what the leader of the country has to say. Unthinkable, treasonous, horrible, blah, blah, blah. But now I think you're seeing it where after President Putin did it, the leaders of countries will be calling Tucker Carlson, will be calling, you had Lavrov meet with Larry Johnson, a couple people. Very powerful leaders are now saying, let me talk to these YouTube X guys or whatever, because that's what the people want to hear. Tucker Carlson's interview. Your thoughts?
You know, when I saw the announcement 2 nights ago, my older daughter, she's 19 years old, she was like, "What? Carlson interviewing the president of Iran?" And then just before we got on this, stream, she came to me with opened on X, and she's like, "It's out. Let's sit down and watch it." Okay, and this is first year university, and the first thing she said after, as we're watching, she's like, "I can't believe I'm watching this on X, on a Tucker Carlson thing. This should be on a national broadcaster." Okay, this is a young lady, 19 years old, immediately recognizing how come all the mainstream quote unquote media and national broadcasters who should be doing this job are not doing it. So no matter what we say about Tucker Carlson, and me and you could disagree with a lot of his opinions, the man is doing the minimum of what a journalist should do. And this is what's making him stand out, because all the other quote unquote journalists in the mainstream media are refusing to do the minimum of their duty, of their job title. Okay, they all want to be advertising executives. Okay, go ahead and make some Coke advertisement for me, not cocaine, but Coca-Cola. But that's part of the advertisement, Coke and cocaine and Coca-Cola, when it had the whole cocaine. So it's really actually great of him to do this. I sat down and I watched the whole thing with my daughter, and the questions that he asked were probing, but they were also respectful. He's sitting with a head of a state. So that's another thing that probably the Zionist and mainstream quote unquote journalists will be attacking Tucker Carlson on, being respectful to a foreign dignitary, a foreign head of state. And he asked a lot of questions that were very important. One of them was about will Iran, was there any assassination attempts on the lives of President Pezeshkian? And the answer was yes, that the Israelis attempted to assassinate him during the 12 days. Okay. And also he was asked about the nuclear weapons. He said they don't want nuclear weapons, that there's the fatwa, the religious decree prohibiting the use of mass destruction weapons. And I think the final question that was important was about there was two questions that were important. One was about, we hear Iranian sleeper cells want to assassinate Trump and want to, do terrorism in the United States. And Pezeshkian asked him, when is the last time you ever heard of an Iranian terrorist blowing up anything, anywhere? When is the last time Iran attacked any other country? It's been 200 years that Iran had no war of aggression on any country. And of course, that there's no assassination plot against Trump, that Netanyahu lies because he wants to kill other leaders and he wants everybody to think that everybody's like him. They want to normalize killing leaders. And finally, the last question that was important was about, will China and Russia come to the aid of Iran if the United States go to war with Iran? And I think the answer of Pezeshkian was very, very interesting. He said, we depend on God Almighty. That is, and our own people and our own developments and capabilities. But first and foremost, we depend on God Almighty. And I think those are very important wars. And then he said, of course, China and Russia will help when they can if this goes to this way. But he's literally saying we don't care about anyone coming to our aid. We're capable, and God will protect us. And that's an amazing answer.
What I think is interesting about that, there are a lot of people who have discussed reports that Russia offered a significant upgrade to Iran's air defense system. They offered a, protective shield. Hey, let's be partners and nobody will attack you. And Iran didn't take it. And it was a mistake. I believe the annals of history will say it wasn't. And I tell you why. There's a big difference between Iran being protected by a nuclear superpower. Well, we can't touch them because they're a nuclear superpower. Okay, fine. There's the guy over there who you say, well, he's a chump, but he's got a big buddy, so I won't mess with him because my buddy will beat him up. So you don't respect him. As opposed to somebody saying, there's a little guy and I'm going to go beat him up. And you go try to beat him up and he beats the hell out of you. He has demonstrated his ability. I think what Iran did, they take some hits, fair enough. Yes, of course, they're humans, and they were facing a erstwhile adversary. But what they just demonstrated was, without the help of a nuclear superpower, that they could easily defeat Israel. So much so that they had to pull their punches. And at the point that the U.S. considered they had economic options with the Straits of Hormuz, they demonstrated, they told the U.S., we're going to hit your bases, and the U.S. Still couldn't shoot the missiles down. That the fact that they didn't get help from Russia or China, notwithstanding that they're apparently going to go out and buy some stuff now, the fact that they didn't get help was far more powerful, because on their own, with their own technology, their own abilities, they took a punch, they got up off the ground, and they battered their attacker mercilessly. I think there is an element of power that they didn't get help from anybody, and that they still easily defeated the empire's proxy, and the empire was scared to come up and fight them. I think there's something to be said for that.
Yes, and now we know that the Iranian radars and air defense systems, including the Bavar, their most advanced one, actually, the ones that were not attacked performed perfectly without S-300s, without S-400s. The problem was that the Israelis and the Americans had agents on the ground that used drones to attack the Bavar air defense systems in the west of the country and the north of it within the first hours. And that's what created a corridor for Israeli jets to go in from North Iraq and from Azerbaijan into the heartlands of Iran. But still, they had to shoot from the airspace in the west of the country and not venture in, because the air defenses of Iran were performing very well. And if we see how the Yemeni air defense systems are, number one, have shot down F-18s and almost shot down F-35s last night, and had painted the B-2 bomber with their radars a few months ago, the Yemenis. That shows you that Iran most probably is more advanced than that, their systems. And it's an issue of making sure that those assets on the ground don't get hit by infiltration, and creating backups and layers that Iran is building, but there's a certain capacity, and that's where purchases from China specifically, I think, is going to fill the shortages that Iran may have in building air defense systems.
One thing last thing I'll say, because I know we're running over a little bit, but the last thing I'll say is there was great discussion about this. President Putin and President Xi didn't go to the BRICS meeting, and what is that? So I tell you what I think it shows. I think it shows an abundance of caution. I think they understand that the U.S. empire is very, very desperate, and that going to that could create a dynamic where the U.S. says, oh boy, Xi and Putin are there both. We're going to try to assassinate them. We're trying to assassinate. I read this also. Apparently, the Israelis had said, oh, we're going to try to kill the leader of Iran. And he was in the street literally came out in the street. He was walking through the streets. He was out in the wide open. And the people, we're told he's hated, he's despised, that the people of Iran were going crazy. They were, just the opposite of hating him. But, they're out there saying they're going to rub out leaders. I think Putin and Xi said, that's not go. And I think it was wise. We'll send our emissaries. But also the Iranian leader apparently came right out in the open. And what we saw was not only that he's well protected in Iran, but they were confident that he's brave, he's not afraid, and that the Iranian people, this business about them not supporting their government and all is vaporized. Final comment, Laith.
Yeah, and BRICS just came out with a statement earlier today condemning the US and Israeli attacks on Iran and Iran's nuclear facilities, and supporting Iran's right to self-defense. So that's, even without the presence of Presidents Putin and Xi, the BRICS managed to do that. And there was a lot of questions with people were worried, will this statement get through because of the presence of the UAE and the others in BRICS? But it seems China and Russia got what they wanted. And those smaller partners that play on both sides, like the UAE, that are inside BRIC, including India. You see, this BRIC statement wouldn't have come out with India veto on it. There's the 5 members that are founding, and India basically has a veto, just like China and Russia and South Africa. So to have this statement come out with India's signature on it, this is a very high position, and probably the Zionists are not happy with Modi and or the Emiratis and whatever for letting this statement come out. And it shows us how actually China and Russia can convince an enemy like India, that's an enemy of China, and or that works with the US and Israel, to continue business with Russia, buying all the oil and smuggling it to the rest of the world. So there is a smart calculations in what Russia and China does in comparison to the jostling and bullying and elbowing that the West does to get its ways.
Let's end this. Thank you very much, everyone. Certainly appreciate spending an hour with us. Let's not forget, before we go, Laith has a great site, and it's called freepalestine.video, and it's because it's a great organization. They're out there, and you can see they're on the scene. They're in dangerous areas. They're reporting in English, right? So that people in the West can get the truth. The latest episodes are there. You've got field reports, military operations. Don't forget, in the upper right-hand corner, go to social media links so you can follow them on all of their social media platforms. And of course, donate. It is important that we help keep them on the air, that we go to donate to Free Palestine TV. And you click on, donate, do the best you can, whatever you can afford. If you might not be able to afford much, but that's fine. Even if you do a small amount, if you can do it monthly, that would be just as good, because that helps get them a steady revenue stream. They've got people there. They pay them what they can. But these are very brave, dedicated people who are going out, risking their lives. So the least we can do is we can go there and we can donate. And also, don't forget, it's important that you share Free Palestine.video on all your social media platforms, and put a little note for people. Hey, please donate and keep them going on the, keep this good work going. Thank you very much, Laith Marouf. Really appreciate it. And it's great. It's funny. A lot of people don't know this. I've only told a few people, we used to be on the radio all the time in DC, and the station that we were at apparently got highly pressured from the Israeli lobby, threatened to be thrown off the air, and eventually they were, of course. But one of the things they were threatened was over Laith Marouf, because the show I was on, we had him on every day. Every single day we had Laith on, and it was great. And he was like the foundation of our radio show. And they got upset and they said he can't be on there. Basically we'll throw. It wasn't our. We were going to be off the air, and So they said, okay, Laith can't be on there. So we couldn't have him on there. So I said, well, I'll start bringing him on my YouTube channel. And other people started. And now, because they threw Laith off a radio station, I see every time I turn around, there's another show. There's Laith Marouf. And it seems to me that the fact that they did that moves you over to YouTube. And now you're all over the place. It seems like everything that they do to try to, the Zionists do to try to, you know, to hurt the cause only backfires on them.
Yeah, and obviously, Garland, you were one of those people that kept the space for me. I would never forget that. It's amazing. And one last thing I would say is that our team in Iran just came back. And starting tonight, we're going to be releasing all these reports that we filmed inside Iran, special interviews, field reporting. So you want to see what truly is happening in Iran and how does the Iranian people feel since that war, go to the website and watch and donate. And we'll talk about, I guess, those reports when I see you next time, Brian.
Sounds good. And I'll have to get with you because I'll be out of town for a week starting Wednesday. So I won't come back till next Wednesday night. So I'll give you a buzz and we'll try to get in. Since we missed Tuesday, we'll do later on in the week. So we won't miss it. As soon as
anything for you, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot. Everybody share us on all your social media platforms. Don't forget, follow me on Rumble and Rockfin and all that kind of stuff. And if you can afford it, you know, Patreon, PayPal, whatever the case may be, even if you can't, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms.